Okay, welcome back to another episode of Retro Muscle. Today's episode will be continuing the Muscle Media 2000 Audiotape series with former editor-in-chief T.C. Luoma interviewing the creator of Muscle Media 2000, Bill Phillips. Okay, let's get to it.
From Golden, Colorado, in the foothills of the beautiful Rocky Mountains, comes Muscle Media 2000. T.C. Luoma, editor-in-chief of the magazine, seeks out the people and the subjects you find in Muscle Media 2000's Audiotape series. At the end of this tape, we'll tell you how to reach Muscle Media 2000. Now, though, let's get on with it. Here's your host, T.C.
Hi, this is T.C. Luoma, and this is the Muscle Media 2000 Audiotape series. This month's interview is with none other than Bill Phillips. 3 years ago, very few people outside of a very hardcore group of bodybuilders that had read his book, The Anabolic Reference Guide, knew who he was. He's now, of course, the executive editor and publisher of the renegade bodybuilding magazine, Muscle Media 2000. But the public still knows very little about him. He answers any and all letters he gets, and he's quite friendly if you run into him on the street, but he's somewhat reluctant to divulge any facts about his personal life. To Bill Phillips, training, supplements, and being the best that you can be are all anybody should be interested in. However, after a lot of badgering, he agreed to do this interview. Who exactly is the real Bill Phillips anyhow? That's what I intend to find out. Hello, Bill. How are you?
Good, Terry. A little busy, but that's about average.
Okay. Hey, let's start at the beginning, and I mean the very beginning. Where were you born?
I was born in Golden, Colorado, where we live today and where the Muscle Media 2000 offices are.
Hey, and what did you want to be when you grew up? When you were a little kid, little Bill Phillips.
From the time I can remember, I was always involved in athletics, and my parents encouraged me to be involved in sports. So I was playing football and wrestling and whatnot from the time I was younger. So I probably envisioned myself being some type of athlete. I think that very early on, I wanted to be a bodybuilder and be involved in bodybuilding.
Were you strong as a kid, or were you one of these wimpy kids that wanted to lift weights to get bigger?
I had pretty good genetics. When I competed as a youngster in athletics, I could kick ass pretty good on the other kids, so I was pretty strong and pretty fast. I did a lot of unusual things when I was younger. When I was in grade school and junior high, I was an exercise freak. I would do push-ups and sit-ups, literally every night for like 10 years in a row. By the time I was 14 years old, I could do over 300 consecutive push-ups. Good, clean, solid push-ups, and probably do sit-ups for hours. I couldn't do that today, but I was probably pretty strong for a kid.
When did you start doing the sit-up and push-ups?
Probably when I was about 8 or 9 years old.
Were your parents worried about you?
Might have been, I don't know. But it was, like I said, it was for me a challenge, and it was fun to see how strong and how fast I could get. And so I practiced all of these things, and that's how I originally led up to my involvement with weight training, because it was another way for me to get stronger and faster.
So how old were you when you first started with weights?
I probably got my first set of barbells and dumbbells when I was probably 12 years old. I didn't know what I was doing with them for the most part. You'd do the same exercises every day, sometimes 5 or 6 days in a row, whatnot. But, I got stronger and I got more muscular.
Now, were you aware at this time that there was such a thing as bodybuilding? Had you seen it anywhere, the magazines or on TV or something?
I hadn't seen any of the bodybuilding magazines, but it was on like Wide World of Sports or one of the weekend sports shows that I actually saw the Mr. Olympia contest or some Mr. Universe contest or something. And, I saw the bodybuilders up on stage posing, and Arnold and Robbie Robinson and Frank Zane. As it is for many people who are in bodybuilding today, it was, immediately, I have to do this. So as soon as I found out about bodybuilding, I wanted to get involved in it.
Were you completely obsessive, or were you still playing other sports at this time?
During junior high and high school, I played sports, wrestling and football. I ran track. But by the time I was probably 16 or 17, I had given up team sports, where the other kids would go out to practice. I would head for the weight room and just work on my own bodybuilding and powerlifting and stuff.
Mm-hmm. How about competition? How old were you when you first decided to compete?
Oh, let's see. I was probably 17. I did the Teenage Mr. Colorado, Teenage Mr. Rocky Mountains, and things like that. But, I would say 17.
Not so fast. How did you do at those shows?
My first contest, I got second place, and my second contest, I got first place, and then I I won everything there was in this area, and then I did some national shows. The competition was much different on the national level. These teenage Mr. America, which I competed in the Teenage National Championships, the NPC, very stiff competition. But I was always in the top, 3 or 4. That was the years that Eddie Robinson and Sean Ray, Franco Santoriello, all of those guys were competing in the teenage classes when I was back in 1983.
Pretty stiff there.
Yeah, they were really big kids.
Yeah. Hey, everybody who reads the magazine knows that at one time you did use steroids. When did you first come into contact with steroids, and what prompted you to start using them?
I trained in a gym down in Denver. There were a few big bodybuilders there, and eventually you just start probing and you start asking what's going on, and then you learn about steroids, as any bodybuilder does who hangs out at these hardcore gyms. After getting my butt thoroughly kicked in national competitions, I figured, well, I need to be 20 pounds heavier than I am. I was competing at about 175 pounds, and I wanted to be 195. So the guys, that knew about steroids told me about them, and back then, God, in the early 80s, you could get anything you wanted, anytime you wanted it. So I started on Dianabol, 3 tablets a day, which was 15 milligrams, nandrolone decanoate, and I took 200 milligrams a week with that, and I'll never forget it. I mean, within a matter of 8 weeks, I probably put on 20 to 30 pounds of weight. Most of it was fat-free mass, but you get the bloating and the extracellular, fluid retention. So, but I mean, I have pictures of it. It's such a stunning difference, that 8-week time in my life, and I went from maybe bench pressing 275 to 350. And
were your friends and family and stuff aware of what you were doing, or were they?
Oh, the friends, that you have at that point are all bodybuilders, so they're all using steroids. So it's, the group behavior thing. It's easy to hang out with people who are all doing the same thing. So we were all bodybuilding and taking steroids. I don't know if my parents really realized. They're very supportive, and they're, I don't know, very nurturing. So, I mean, it was just supporting my bodybuilding and my competing and whatnot. I don't think there was ever really any times that they would come down on me for doing anything. But they probably figured out that, steroids had something to do with them.
Mm-hmm. Now, I understand that, as many young bodybuilders often do, you eventually moved to Venice.
Okay, so here I am. I get involved in bodybuilding when I'm, 16, 17, 18. Competing on the national level, and then, I take some steroids. Now I'm a big guy, 200 pounds. Actually, I got up to 215 pounds. I figured, well, geez, this is it. I got to go to Venice to pursue my, bodybuilding dream. So I went to Venice, and, it was a wild trip.
So did you go to Gold's Gym, the Mecca?
Yeah, I worked out at Gold's Gym, and this was in the mid-'80s. My overall perception, having been there, was that it just wasn't something that I wanted to continue to be involved in. It is not the same when you're there as you imagine it from here. Okay, you see the pictures of the people working out at Gold's Gym, and everybody's beautiful and lean, and there's muscle everywhere, and then there's, the beach right across the street or about a block away, and, you envision that you're going to tan all day long and work out and eat. When you get out there, it's not like that. It's actually kind of a cesspool, a big attraction for every sociopath in the country to come to Venice. And I don't just mean the bodybuilders. I mean, it's just not a pretty part of the country. And, anybody that goes there has probably experienced that same thing, and that's why so many people, it's kind of a pilgrimage for bodybuilders, but it is one that only lasted a few months for me.
So how long was it, did you stay overall?
Like probably 3 or 4 months, but it just, it was a good experience, though, to have that under my belt, so you don't have to wonder what it's like out there.
Now, did you become jaded that quickly, or did your money run out? I mean, most people end up...
Well, yeah, I didn't have a lot of money. You just do what you could to try to get by out there. That's what everybody does. I mean, nobody has a career. They're all waiting to make a breakthrough in bodybuilding and get a contract or be able to compete successfully, and very, very few people do that. And you see so many people, living day to day, living out of suitcases, bodybuilders that you thought had reached the top, I mean, you would see them, and they literally didn't have money for food or supplements or steroids. You know, I figured that out right away. You know, these guys were way bigger and much, much better bodybuilders than I was or would ever be, and they were still highly unsuccessful. So it was an interesting experience.
So it only took you a few months to figure out what it takes many years. Okay, so you came back to Colorado, to Denver, to Golden, and did you go to college at that point?
Right. So let's see, that's mid-'80s. At that point, I, really decided, after seeing all these people, that I wanted to try to do something, more with my youth. I would try to keep, bodybuilding as a hobby instead of trying to make it into a career. And I came back to Golden, Colorado, and I went to Colorado University, a local state campus in Denver, and I studied business, and I studied medicine, the things that I was interested in.
Okay, and then, so after college, what did you do? Why didn't you go into medicine?
During college, I weight trained, and even though I wasn't using steroids anymore, I continued to follow and virtually devour anything I could, information-wise, about steroids, about bodybuilding and nutrition. Dan Duchesne was my idol. Every word that he said, I would just, totally absorb into my brain, and I would seek out other experts, Dr. D. Pasquale. At that time, there was only a few real experts on steroids. So I continued to, as well as go to college and study business and medicine, I continued to study, what I really was fascinated with was bodybuilding and steroids and nutrition and supplements and training. So I started the newsletter then while I was in college. Actually, I wrote a small book called the Anabolic Reference Guide, and I wrote this back in 1986. And I started to advertise it in Bob Kennedy's Muscle Mag in 1987. And I found that other people like me were interested in steroids too. I ended up kind of starting a business then and using the money. I thought at that time my goal was to sell enough books. Then I started a newsletter, sell enough newsletters, subscriptions, to pay my way through medical school.
So you were involved in your own business from day one, virtually?
I had odd jobs here and there as a kid and whatnot, but I've always been an entrepreneur. Geez, as a kid, I guess I had a paper route, which is kind of an entrepreneur. You kind of work when you want and how you want, and no set time schedule and whatnot.
Well, tell me a little bit more about this, the Anabolic Reference Update. For those listeners who don't know what it was or how it came about, I mean, how did you get your first subscribers, and how did you get the first concept, and was it successful?
Let's see, it started with the Anabolic Reference Guide, which was a little cheesy. And, I look back at it now, and it was just a little cheesy pamphlet about, maybe 25 steroids and some basic information about them. At the time, it was very valuable information for a lot of people. So, they appreciated it. But I look back at it now, and it's just like, God, I look like a moron for having written this pamphlet. This was 1987. No one would accept any advertisements for the book except Bob Kennedy. And so I put a little 1/6 of a page ad in Bob Kennedy's Muscle Mag. That's what really started it all. I sold the book for $8.95, and I'd sell like 50 books a week or something. I'd make $400 a week because the book would cost you less than $1 to get printed up. And after I had sold about 1,000 books, I decided to do a little newsletter that was kind of an addendum to the Anabolic Reference Guide, and the newsletter was called the Anabolic Reference Update. And I sold subscriptions to that for $23 a year or something, and I would literally sit in my apartment and type these newsletters myself and try to edit them, and I would go to the printer and get them printed up. I would cut the pages and collate them and staple them on my kitchen table, put them in envelopes, and then I would literally have to type each envelope. I had about 400 or 500 subscribers back in '88, and I would have to sit there every month and type out 500 names and addresses. And some of these guys are still with me today. I recognize many of the names. So, for example, like when we go on the fitness cruise in about a month and a half, there's a few people going on the cruise that have been with me since '87. For example, when I answer all of my mail each week, I'll see names that I recognize, and people go, well, how on earth do you recognize this name? You've got, tens of thousands of customers now. I go, well, these are some of my original boys here, because every month, I would have to, type that name and address. I could recite the names and addresses of probably 80% of my people.
That's great.
So that's how it all started. It's just a small home business, selling paper and ink. It just grew and grew because of the way, I somehow made a connection with these people.
So when did you first start actually distributing products?
Well, from the Anabolic Reference Update, I had a group of a few thousand people by 1990 that were reading the newsletter, and basically the newsletter was mostly about steroids, but often, discussed training and nutrition, diets for gaining weight, and diets for losing fat. And we got into supplements a few times, and when I would discuss supplements, I had so many letters from subscribers that said, where can I get this supplement? That I said, well, this just seems like a natural extension of what I'm doing. I'll provide the supplements that we discuss in the newsletter. I just started, buying the supplements wholesale and then selling them to my subscribers. So that's how I got involved with the supplements.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the big one. Let's talk about metrics and Dr. Conley. How did you find Dr. Conley, or did he find you?
Well, this was, back in 1990. I was writing a lot of stuff about the new wonder drug, clenbuterol. At that time, Dan Duchesne is the only other expert that had really talked much about clenbuterol and its use because of the clampdown on steroids in the late 80s. People were looking for anything that they could get their hands on. So we started exploring other things, and clenbuterol became a real hot topic. So I researched clenbuterol, and I did a lot of interviews with bodybuilders who had used it, and I wrote about it in my newsletter, which by that time was starting to progress into a larger format, a more comprehensive, newsletter, and starting to really look like it was something professional, I guess, at that point. I got a call from a doctor, Dr. Conley, and he wanted to discuss some things about clenbuterol. He had read all of the medical literature. He was just wondering how it actually worked with bodybuilders, and I told him what I knew, and we kind of hit it off. He was, just a fascinating man to talk to, and at that time I was so hungry for knowledge that I would, just pump him, just slam him for information, and our conversations would go on for hours and hours, talking about bodybuilders and weight training and drugs like clenbuterol and steroids. And it wasn't until probably 6 months after I knew him that he said, hey, I have a kind of a little research project that he had been working on for some time. It's called Metrex, and he told me about it and said I should try it. So I was eager at that point, knowing how knowledgeable he was and how excited he was about this nutritional product, to try it. I picked up a couple cases, probably late in 1990. I really liked the stuff. I was very impressed with it. At that time, it came in just a plain cardboard box with tin cans. They were just, research batches of products, so they had no labels on them. I remember the base was in probably a 1-pound corrugated tin, and the Metrex Plus came in a larger, regular tin can, and you had to mix them up like a potion and all this stuff. So, but that was really the beginning of our relationship.
So I assume you cut some sort of deal with him so that you could start distributing the product.
Well, I literally had to beg Dr. Conley for about 8 months before he would let me try a field test with Metrex and some of my subscribers to the newsletter. This was back in probably May of 1991. In May, I think I got like 100 of my subscribers involved in a field study where they went on Metrex for a period of time and then filled out an extensive feedback form. I said, well, Dr. Conley, this will let you know what bodybuilders think of your product. Kind of a real-world test, because he had only been doing stuff in a controlled setting. So after that, we did the survey, and the results were, incredible. People really enjoyed the product. I provided the survey information to Dr. Conley, and at that point, he was a little bit more open to the idea of distributing it to athletes and bodybuilders. But he was still very apprehensive, so I had a lot of work to do, and eventually we worked out a deal where he allowed my company to distribute the product, and then it just grew and grew and grew.
So I assume you advertised it through the update.
Yeah, initially it was only advertised through my Anabolic Reference Update. Geez, that's the only way it was advertised for about the first year.
So how much product did you sell the very first time you advertised?
Oh, 3 years ago, this is only a little more than 3 years ago, there were probably a few hundred people on the product. The sales were not significant. To me, at that time, they might have been, I guess at that time, they were impressive. You know, there was a very hot-selling product, and the reason it became so good, such a great product to distribute, is that once you sell it once, people would just buy it again and again and again. It really gave my company a boost at the time, and it's been a very important project for me ever since.
So how many people use Metrex today in late 1994?
Well, it's been on the market for 3 years now, and like I said, it's just grown and grown. There's literally hundreds of thousands of people in the United States right now that use Metrex, and you'll see it. I mean, you'll see it everywhere. If you turn on the TV, you might see somebody wearing a Metrex tank top or T-shirt, or Metrex cap or Metrex patches, and I don't even know who these people are. Just yesterday, I was watching some pro beach volleyball, and one of the women champions was wearing a Metrex cap. The professional baseball players like Jose Canseco, professional football players with the Dallas Cowboys, a lot of the other pro teams, probably 22 of the 28 professional teams use Metrex in the NFL. Sylvester Stallone has talked about his use of Metrex to get in shape for the Vanity Fair cover. Cher, in the latest issue of Red Book, calls Metrex one of her shape-up secrets. So it's just exploded. I mean, it's everywhere.
Terrific. Now, answer this once and for all, because even I get tired of hearing this. Do you own Metrex?
I wish I owned Metrex.
Yeah.
I wish I owned Metrex. It is a company that is owned by Dr. Conley. I have certain distribution rights to the product that are very limited. I don't own any part of Metrex. It used to be called Metrex Substrate Technology, and now it's called Metrex USA. But I only wish I owned Metrex USA. It would be, I'd be set for life.
You and me both.
But it's been a good opportunity, and I've been very proud to actually be the prime catalyst for bringing this product to the market. That's really what I did, is I found a good product, and I introduced it, to the market, so that a lot of people have benefited from using Metrex, and I believe that 100%.
Okay. Let's talk about Muscle Media 2000, how it got started, but why first the name? Where did that come from, Muscle Media 2000?
Well, I know you're probably tired of talking about Dr. Conley by now, but back in the spring of 1992, actually it was earlier in 1992, I think, in one of Dr. Conley and I's late night conversations, sometimes we'd talk from like 10 at night to 2 in the morning, and I talked to him about the magazine, and I was trying to come up with a name, and he came up with the name Muscle Media 2000. So that was Dr. Conley's name. I own it, and I own all of Muscle Media 2000, all the rights. I mean, none of them are shared by Dr. Conley or Metrex, but George Snyder, a magazine producer that Jeff Everson introduced me to, actually George Snyder and I own the magazine, but Dr. Conley came up with the name.
Okay. Now, the magazine has a reputation for comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable. In other words, making life hell for unscrupulous supplement manufacturers. Have you picked up a lot of flack for this stand?
I would say we get 98% positive feedback and 2% flack. Most of the flack comes from people who don't want us around. Actually, about 2 years ago, or even a year and a half ago, I was much more ornery than I am now, and I would be much more likely to cause trouble. So back then, we would pick up a lot more resistance from the industry. I think now a lot of people have accepted the fact that Muscle Media 2000 is going to be here, and that Bill Phillips is going to be here, Metrex, and other projects that I'm going to be involved in, are going to exist, and they can't squelch them. Actually, the people that I used to pick on, the Scott Chinnerys and the Tom Ciolas and even the Joe Weider group, the people I was actually a little peon pecking at their toes. It was kind of a nuisance. Well, now Muscle Media 2000 is the fastest growing magazine in the category. Metrex is the most popular nutritional product of its kind on the market. So we are really, we have really become the force that other people have to try to work with. It's an interesting situation to happen so fast. From just 3 years ago, we were unknown to, now, we are a contender. We have to be dealt with.
What about the Muscle Media 2000 seal of approval? And still, a lot of people don't know what that is. So why don't you clarify what that is and how it came about?
Okay, the Muscle Media 2000 seal of approval you'll see on ads in Muscle Media 2000. It just means that we have, or that we do regularly test that company's supplement products to find out if it actually contains what its label claims. Now, about 3 years ago, and with my Anabolic reference update, I would test a lot of supplements on the market, and I would find out often that they didn't contain what their label claimed. For example, there were some protein powders on the market that said they contained 25 grams of protein per serving, and after analyzing them, you would find that there's as little as 3 grams of protein per serving.
Incredible.
So I really felt that, and I had actually at that time blamed some of the magazine publishers for letting this happen, because I said, and I actually even blamed some of the food distributors, because I thought that it was their responsibility to try to at least make some effort to make sure this doesn't happen. So I said, when we get a magazine and when we start accepting advertising from these supplement companies, we're going to test them. And we're going to test them regularly at random. And if they contain the amount of protein and carbohydrates and whatnot that it says on the label, then we'll give them the seal of approval and let them advertise in the magazine. So that's what that's all about. It's just kind of a promise I made about 3 years ago that I'm following through on. And hopefully it helps some people, discern that what product is pretty good and which one is not.
So I assume you turn away a lot of advertising money then.
Oh, God, we turn down tons of advertising. In Muscle Media 2000, it's about 30% advertising and 70% text. It might vary a little bit, maybe 3% one way or the other, but I could easily have a book that's 50% advertising. Maybe, we could do a 200-page book with 50% advertising. We have so many people that want to get into Muscle Media 2000 because the advertising in Muscle Media 2000 pulls. It will outpull many of the other magazines by a large margin. We turn away a lot of advertising, not just for supplements, though. Books, courses. Every once in a while, one will slip by you that's embarrassing. It gets in the magazine. It's like, oh, God, how did we let that one get by? But usually we make an effort. That's all I can say.
Now, I know you catch a lot of flack about this, speaking of advertising. Why are there so many ads for Metrex in the magazine?
Well, first of all, I believe in Metrex, so I feel comfortable with it. Second is they pay for the advertising. We do need some advertising revenue to run the magazine. I don't have any qualms at all about accepting money for Metrex advertising. So that's one of the big things. But I think that most of the editorial stuff that comes up about Metrex, the story we had on the Dallas Cowboys and their use of Metrex, a lot of the fitness competitors and the people in the shape-up contests that get great results using Metrex, these are things that are still part of my passion about letting people know that there's actually something out there that works for a lot of people, maybe not for 100% of the people. So there's a few reasons. We need the money, and I feel good about it.
Okay. Let's get back to the editorial content of the magazine a little bit. Why doesn't Muscle Media 2000 cover bodybuilding shows like every other magazine?
Well, we started to cover bodybuilding magazines when we came out because I thought, well, let's see, Muscle Media 2000 is going to be a bodybuilding magazine. It has to look like the other bodybuilding magazines. And every bodybuilding magazine covers contests. But I realized, after reading my mail and doing some surveys of the readers of the magazine, nobody cared about the contest. If they did care, they could pick up a magazine like Flex, who has outstanding contest coverage. None of the other magazines miss anything as far as contest coverage. They do a great job. Okay, if you want to find out who won the Mr. Olympia, or that someone got sick a week before the contest or had a car accident and couldn't compete, then you can find that in all of the other magazines. It wasn't necessary to print it in Muscle Media. So when we pulled the bodybuilding contest coverage out, we opened up room for more articles on how it's done and how you can do it. I mean, that's what Muscle Media 2000 is all about. It's the how it's done and how you can do it bodybuilding magazine. It's not really about, how to pose and oil up and, how to pick your posing trunks for the show and whatnot. It's more for the guys that make up the majority of the market.
Amen. Now, weren't you initially worried a little bit that a magazine that didn't cover shows or didn't do articles on how Joe Blow trains his biceps and that screens the credibility of his advertisers and is extremely candid about steroids, weren't you worried that they wouldn't make it?
Actually, I wasn't. I am so confident in when I feel passionate about something, whether it's a marketing project or a product like Metrax or some of the other products that I'm pretty enthusiastic about. I don't, go back and forth at all. When I feel strongly about something, I mean, that's it. I knew Muscle Media 2000 would work. I knew it was the right thing to do. I knew that I wanted to talk about steroids in the magazine, and I wanted to talk about what works and what doesn't work. And I wanted to have rules for the advertisers. I knew it would work. Sometimes when I have a feeling about an issue, I don't care if the President of the United States or Joe Weider calls me and says, this is a stupid idea, it's not going to work. I don't even listen. I know it's the right thing to do. So that's the way I felt about Muscle Media, and I feel that way about, quite a few things. And it's kind of I don't know if it's an entrepreneurial instinct or stubbornness or ego, probably a little bit of each, but I do what I think is right. And, Muscle Media 2000 has turned out to be very successful. It's growing very fast on the newsstands. And we don't even advertise it. It's all word of mouth. If the magazine wasn't being well received by most of the readers, we wouldn't continue to appear on more newsstands and sell more issues every month.
Fair enough.
Or every other month.
Right. Do you think Muscle Media 2000 has influenced other bodybuilding magazines?
Yeah, it definitely has. A lot of the issues that we discuss in Muscle Media 2000 end up being discussed in the next issue of Flex or Muscle Mag. I'm not saying that these magazines are just copying Muscle Media 2000 completely, but there are, for example, the Flex article is was it Drug World? They didn't have Drug World before Muscle Media 2000 had an Ergogen Update or Ask the Guru and whatnot, and they try to, for example, the latest issue of Muscle and Fitness has an article on, do supplements really work, and, sizing up the weight gainers. And I know that in the next issue of Muscle and Fitness, which isn't out yet, they have a similar article on proteins, sizing up the protein powders and whatnot, where they compare the products. And we were doing this quite a long time ago. So we have had an influence, and I think that's a positive influence. Other magazines influence Muscle Media. You and I both know that we love those Flex covers so much that we decided to try to do something different with Muscle Media 2000 covers. Not necessarily the same thing they're doing with the Flex covers, but, we just decided to use multiple images, and they've been very popular, and I like them, and I think you do too.
Sure.
So we're all, I guess, borrowing and stealing ideas from each other.
Right. Speaking of the Weeders, what exactly is your relationship with the Weeders? The fans seem to think there's some sort of war going on. Is there?
Like I said, I was a real nuisance. In the late 80s, when I started my little newsletter and my booklets and whatnot, I was unknown. And if there was just a few thousand people that even knew of my company, Mile High Publishing, and its material. As we grew, I guess, we became somewhat of a nuisance to a lot of companies. We mouthed off a few times about Weider, about how the bodybuilders on the cover of the magazine sure look like they take steroids, but, when you get in and read the articles, lo and behold, none of them ever talk about taking steroids. And that was one of the main issues that we just continued to it was really an irritating issue, because all of the young bodybuilders or even more mature bodybuilders who first get introduced to the sport, come in usually through the Weider magazines. They start with Muscle and Fitness. I think they fall for what is probably a little bit deceptive is that, hey, here's a guy who looks incredible, and you get in and you find out how do I look like that, and you just read about training and supplements. You never hear anything about steroids. And then when you do find out, oh, man, these guys take, not just a little bit, but, buckets and buckets full of steroids, you feel kind of pissed off.
Yeah.
So at that time, I was pissed off about that, and I wrote about it, and that didn't put me in too good a standing with anyone in the industry, because they don't want to talk about that. That's not, the things you're supposed to get into. But that's where the main controversy came from. But more recently, I have a better relationship with a lot of the people in the industry. And I think, they have come around. I've seen articles in the Weider magazines where they do say, of course you're not going to get 22-inch arms if if you're training naturally and whatnot. And I think that's all that I'm really asking for, or at the time was really pissed off about, is that, you've got to at least admit and come out and say that, you can get great results from weight training and not look like Lou Ferrigno. You might not look like a bodybuilder at all, but you still, in your own way, have benefited tremendously from training with weights and using, proper nutrition. So, they wouldn't have me over for dinner or anything, that's for sure. But I have talked to Joe Weider recently, and we talked about that.
Very good. Speaking of steroids yet again, what's your personal stand on steroids? Has it changed since you wrote the Anabolic reference update?
Well, at that time, I was pretty pro-steroid. I thought, well, there's nothing wrong with taking steroids. Why should it be illegal? If you do it the right way, you're not going to get hurt, or at least the chances of you getting, some serious side effect are probably much less serious with steroids than they are with many widely prescribed and even over-the-counter medications. 200 people died last year from using aspirin. I know that if, there are any, casualties from using steroids last year, it was, nobody's got exact records on it, but it's a very small number, even with the outrageous abuse. So a few years ago, I was much more sympathetic to the steroid user. Over the past few years, I have kind of reacted to the new legal stance on steroids. I really haven't changed my mind that these drugs are not that dangerous if they're used properly. The law has changed. And if, for example, I had a bottle of Dianabol in my pocket, they don't make it anymore, but if I did, I might as well have a gram of Coke in the other pocket because they're going to be viewed the same way. If you go before a judge and say, well, come on, man, it's just steroids, all the bodybuilders are doing it. They don't give a crap. They look at it the same way they look at cocaine. Many judges do, at least. And I wouldn't encourage anyone to get involved in anything that's so illegal. Just for a one-time offense, you could go to prison for, 6 months, and I know people who have. So my stance on steroids is, geez, if they were legal and there were doctors that were competent and that you could go to them and follow their prescriptions and use the drugs for their cosmetic enhancing effects, I would think that's, pretty reasonable, but they're not legal, okay? And they're, the counterfeit market that's come from this whole, new legal stance is making using steroids even more dangerous. I've known not just a few, but literally dozens of guys who have had to go to the hospital and have enormous abscesses taken out of their hips from using, injectable steroids that were counterfeit and actually contained contaminants. And the average guy doesn't have the slightest idea of what a counterfeit steroid looks like and what a real steroid looks like. And that's why we try to share that information in Muscle Media 2000, because, whether I say don't use steroids because they're illegal or whether I don't say that, the guys are going to use them anyway. I don't care who says not to use them. If they've decided to use them, they're going to. So what we do in Muscle Media 2000 is try to share some information through both Dan Duchesne's articles, Dr. Robert Price, a late friend of ours, Dr. X, had some great information on steroids and whatnot. So, I think that I'm still pro-truth and whatnot about steroids. I wouldn't recommend to any friend of mine to use them. I've talked a lot of people out of using them recently. A couple of friends of mine that write for the magazine that are competitive or were formerly competitive, I've really sat down and talked to and said, this is getting ridiculous. How much bigger do you want to be? How much space can you take up, and what difference does it make if you weigh 200 or 225? You're still athletic and muscular and have a great body, but some of these guys, they just get that attitude. I used to be 225. I used to take up more space. Big deal.
This concludes Side 1 of the Muscle Media 2000 audio tape interview with Bill Phillips. Please turn the tape over.
Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and if you want more bodybuilding content, check out my Instagram at Retro Muscle Mags. Tune in next week for part 2.